The dust had barely settled on the road out of Lewiston, Idaho, when Frederick Palmer's husband rode away in the spring of 1876, leaving behind more than just a broken marriage. He left behind whispers that spread through the town like wildfire, poisonous words that painted his wife as a woman whose mind had fractured, whose grasp on reality had slipped away like water through fingers. The townspeople believed him because men like Richard Palmer knew how to speak with authority, how to make lies sound like gospel truth, and because it was easier to believe a woman had lost her senses than to consider what kind of man would abandon his wife and spread such vicious rumors. Frederick stood on the porch of the small house at the edge of town, watching the backs of the church ladies as they hurried past without so much as a glance in her direction. 3 months had passed since Richard left, and the isolation had become her daily companion. The general store owner's wife clutched her daughter's hand tighter when Frederick approached. The banker crossed the street to avoid passing her on the boardwalk. Even Reverend Thompson had suggested, in his carefully measured tone, that perhaps Frederick might benefit from a stay at the Territorial Asylum in Blackfoot. She was not crazy. She knew this with the same certainty that she knew the sun would rise over the Clearwater River each morning. What she was, however, was alone, and in a town like Lewiston in 1876, a woman alone was a woman vulnerable. The morning Xander Thompson rode into town, Frederick was in her small garden behind the house, coaxing life from the Idaho soil. Her hands were deep in the earth, planting beans, when she heard the unfamiliar sound of hoofbeats stopping at her gate. She looked up, shading her eyes against the late May sun, and saw a man dismounting from a sturdy chestnut mare. He was tall, with dark hair that touched his collar and eyes that seemed to take in everything without judgment. His clothes marked him as a working cowboy, dusty from the trail, but there was something else in the way he carried himself, a quiet confidence that had nothing to do with bravado. "Pardon me, madam," he said, removing his hat. His voice was deep, respectful. "I am looking for work, and I heard in town that you might have a barn that needs repairs." Frederick stood slowly, wiping her hands on her apron. She was 24 years old, with auburn hair that caught the light like copper and green eyes that had learned to be wary. "You heard that in town?" she asked, unable to keep the skepticism from her voice. "And they sent you here?" Xander's expression shifted slightly, understanding crossing his features. "Actually, no, madam. They told me to stay away from here, said the woman who lived in this house was touched in the head, not safe to be around." He paused, his gaze steady on hers. "But I have been trailing cattle for 10 years, and I have learned that when a whole town agrees on something that quickly, it is usually because they are repeating what they have been told rather than what they have seen. I figured I would come see for myself." Something in Frederick's chest loosened, just a fraction. "The barn does need repairs," she admitted, "but I do not have much money to pay you." "I will work for room and board if you have got a spare room," Xander said. "And maybe some of whatever you are planning to do with those beans you are planting." For the first time in 3 months, Frederick felt something close to hope. "The spare room is small, but it is clean. There is a pump in the yard and the outhouse is behind the lilac bushes." "That is more than I have had for the past 2 weeks, madam. I am grateful." "Frederick," she said. "My name is Frederick Palmer." "Xander Thompson, madam. Frederick is an unusual name for a woman, if you do not mind my saying." "My father wanted a son," she said simply. "He got me instead, and decided the name suited me just fine." Over the following days, Xander proved himself to be a man of his word. He rose with the sun and worked until the light failed, rebuilding the sagging barn wall, replacing rotted boards in the porch, fixing the broken gate that Frederick had been tying shut with rope for months. He spoke little but listened well, and Frederick found herself talking to him in ways she had not talked to anyone in years, certainly not to Richard, who had always been too busy with his own pursuits to care about her thoughts on anything beyond what was for dinner. She learned that Xander was 27, that he had grown up on a small ranch in Montana Territory before his parents died of fever, that he had been working cattle drives and ranch jobs ever since. He had a younger sister who had married a shopkeeper in Denver, and he sent her money when he could. He read books when he could get his hands on them, and he had a quiet way with animals that spoke of patience and kindness. "Why did your husband leave?" Xander asked one evening as they sat on the porch after supper, watching the sun paint the sky orange and pink beyond the town. Frederick was quiet for a long moment. She had not told anyone the truth, had not dared to, knowing how it would sound. But something about Xander's steady presence made her want to try. "Richard was involved in some business dealings that were not entirely legal," she said carefully. "Land claims that belonged to homesteaders who had been run off, money that disappeared from the bank where he worked as a clerk. I found documents in his desk, letters that made it clear what he was doing. When I confronted him, he said I had misunderstood, that I was seeing things that were not there." "But you had not misunderstood," Xander said. "It was not a question." "No, and he knew that I knew the truth." So before he left town, ahead of questions that were starting to be asked, he made sure everyone believed I could not be trusted, that my mind was not sound, that anything I might say about him would be the ramblings of a disturbed woman. "That is a particular kind of cruel," Xander said quietly. "It is effective," Frederick replied, hearing the bitterness in her own voice. "No one believes a crazy woman." "I believe you," Xander said. He turned to look at her, his dark eyes serious. "I have been in town enough now to see how they treat you, and I have been here long enough to see that you are one of the sanest people I have ever met. You keep your house, you tend your garden, you have been nothing but kind and fair to me. Whatever your husband said about you was a lie, and I expect he knew it." Frederick felt tears prick at her eyes, unexpected and sudden. She had not cried when Richard left, had not cried when the townspeople turned their backs on her, but this simple statement of belief from a man who barely knew her cracked something open inside her chest. "Thank you," she whispered. Xander reached over and took her hand, his grip warm and solid. "You do not have to thank me for seeing the truth." As spring turned to summer, something shifted between them. It was in the way Xander's eyes would seek her out across the yard, the way Frederick found herself taking extra care with her appearance in the mornings, pinning her hair with more attention, wearing her better dress even for everyday work. It was in the small gestures, the cup of coffee he would bring her before she asked, the way she saved him the larger portions at dinner, the way their hands would brush when passing tools and neither would pull away quite as quickly as they might have. The town noticed. Mrs. Henderson from the general store made pointed comments about propriety when Frederick came in to buy flour. The banker's wife suggested loudly to her companion that some women had no shame. Frederick felt the weight of their judgment, but it mattered less than it might have, because Xander's presence had given her something she had not had in so long: an ally. One afternoon in early July, as Frederick was hanging laundry and Xander was working on replacing the chicken coop fence, a rider came fast up the road. It was Tom Willis, the deputy sheriff, and his face was grim. "Mr. Thompson," he called out as he dismounted, "I need a word." Xander set down his hammer and walked over, and Frederick moved closer, anxiety tightening in her stomach. "What can I do for you, deputy?" "There has been some trouble reported," Willis said, his tone careful. Seems some items have gone missing from various properties around town. Tools, mostly, and some tack from the livery. There are folks who say they have seen someone matching your description near those places. I have been into town for supplies, same as anyone, Xander said calmly, but I have not taken anything that was not paid for or freely given. I am sure that is true, Willis said, though his expression suggested otherwise. But I am going to need to have a look around your room if you do not mind, just to clear things up. He does mind, and so do I, Frederick said, stepping forward. This is my property, Deputy Willis, and unless you have an actual warrant, you have no right to search it. Willis's expression hardened. Now, Mrs. Palmer, I do not think you are in the best position to be making decisions about what is right and what is not. Everyone knows you have not been quite yourself since your husband left. Everyone knows what Richard Palmer wanted them to know, Frederick said, her voice steady despite the anger rising in her chest. And unless you have actual evidence of wrongdoing, I am asking you to leave my property. There will be evidence enough if we look, Willis said. Samuel Drake said he saw your hired man coming out of his barn yesterday evening, and this morning he found his best bridle missing. I was not anywhere near Samuel Drake's barn yesterday evening, Xander said. I was here, fixing the leak in Mrs. Palmer's roof. It took me until well past dark. She would say that, would she not? Willis replied, given that she is the one paying you. I am not paying him anything but room and board, Frederick said, and I am telling you the truth. Xander was here all evening. I brought him supper while he was working on the roof. Willis looked between them, and Frederick saw the calculation in his eyes. He was deciding whether to push this further, whether to make an issue of it. I am going to be keeping an eye on you, Thompson, he finally said. And Mrs. Palmer, you might want to consider whether having a stranger staying on your property is wise, given your situation. After Willis rode away, Frederick and Xander stood in the yard, both understanding what had just happened. Someone was trying to drive Xander away to isolate Frederick again. This was Samuel Drake's doing, Frederick said quietly. He was one of the men involved in Richard's land scheme. He knows I saw his name in those letters. Then he wants me gone so you are alone again, Xander said. So no one will believe you if you decide to speak up about what you know. I should not have let you stay, Frederick said, guilt washing over her. I have brought trouble to you. Frederick, look at me. Xander waited until she met his eyes. I am a grown man and I make my own choices. I chose to stay here and I am choosing to stay now. They are going to have to do more than spread rumors to run me off, but the trouble did not stop with rumors. Over the next 2 weeks, more items went missing, and each time someone claimed to have seen Xander in the vicinity. The blacksmith's anvil tools disappeared. The schoolteacher's horse threw a shoe that looked like it had been deliberately loosened. Each incident brought more suspicion, more dark looks when Xander went into town. Frederick knew they were being set up, knew that Samuel Drake and his associates were orchestrating this to protect themselves. But she had no proof, nothing that would stand up against the word of respected businessmen. She lay awake at night, listening to the sounds of Xander moving around in the spare room, and wondered how long they could hold out against this campaign of harassment. The breaking point came on a hot evening in late July. Frederick was in the kitchen, preparing supper, when she heard shouting from the yard. She ran outside to find Xander facing down 3 men on horseback. Samuel Drake was in the center, flanked by the banker, Robert Mitchell, and Tom Willis, though Willis at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. "We found our proof, Thompson," Drake said, his voice full of satisfaction. "Found my missing bridle in your saddlebag." "That is impossible," Xander said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "I have never touched your bridle." "Then how did it get there?" Drake demanded. You calling me a liar? I am saying someone put it there, Xander replied. Same as someone has been setting up all these other incidents. You have got a lot of nerve, boy, Mitchell said. Stealing from honest folks and then claiming you are being framed. He is being framed, Frederick said, moving to stand beside Xander. By you, Mr. Drake, and by you, Mr. Mitchell, and by whoever else was involved in the land fraud scheme with my husband. You want Xander gone because he is the only person who believes me, who would stand with me if I decided to take what I know to the territorial marshal. The three men went very still. Those are serious accusations, Mrs. Palmer, Drake said slowly. The kind of accusations that a woman in your state should be very careful about making. My state? Frederick felt her fear transforming into fury. You mean the state your friend Richard Palmer convinced everyone I was in? The madness that conveniently appeared right when I discovered what he and you and half the business owners in this town were doing. You are not well, Mitchell said, but there was an edge to his voice now. Everyone knows it. These delusions you are having, they are getting worse. They are not delusions, Frederick said, and I have had enough of being told that they are. I know what I saw in those documents. I know the names that were listed. And I am going to the territorial marshal's office in Boise City, and I am going to tell them everything. You will not make it to Boise City, Drake said, and the threat in his voice was unmistakable. Yes, she will, Xander said quietly. Because I will be riding with her, and so help me, if anything happens to her, I will make sure every newspaper from here to San Francisco hears about what is happening in Lewiston, Idaho. Willis shifted in his saddle. Now, let us all just calm down, he said. Nobody needs to be making threats. Then tell your friends to stop fabricating evidence, Xander said. Tell them to stop harassing a woman whose only crime was standing up to a thief. We are not done here, Drake said, but he pulled his horse around. Not by a long shot. After they rode away, Frederick found herself shaking. Xander put his arm around her shoulders, steadying her. We need to leave, he said quietly. Tonight, if we wait, they will find a way to stop us. I have nowhere to go, Frederick said. This house, it is all I have. You have more than that, Xander said. He turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. Frederick, these past 2 months have been the best of my life, and that is not because of the roof over my head or the food on the table. It is because of you, because of your strength, your kindness, your courage. You deserve better than this town, better than these people who would not know the truth if it bit them. Xander, Frederick whispered, seeing something in his eyes that made her heart beat faster. I love you, he said simply. I have loved you since the day you stood in your garden and agreed to take a chance on a stranger because he was willing to see you for who you really are. Come with me. We will go to Boise City, yes, and you will tell the marshal everything you know. But after that, come with me. We can go anywhere you want. Montana, California, Colorado, anywhere you can have a fresh start. I love you too, Frederick said, the words spilling out before she could question them, and she realized they were true. She had fallen in love with this quiet, steady man who had seen past the lies to the truth of her. But I cannot ask you to give up everything for me. You are not asking, Xander said. I am offering. Frederick, I have been drifting for 10 years, working jobs that did not matter, going places that were not home. With you, I have found something worth staying for, worth fighting for. Let me fight for you. Let me stand with you. Frederick kissed him then, reaching up to pull his face down to hers, and his arms came around her, strong and sure. The kiss was everything she had not let herself hope for, passionate and tender and real. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Xander rested his forehead against hers. Is that a yes? Yes, Frederick said. Yes to all of it. They left Lewiston in the dark hours before dawn, taking only what they could carry on horseback. Xander had his mare, and Frederick rode the old gelding that had been hers before Richard left. They headed south and east, toward Boise City, riding hard through the summer heat. At night, they made camp away from the roads, and Xander would hold Frederick close as they lay under the stars, promising her that everything would be all right. The journey to Boise City took 5 days of hard riding. They arrived dusty and exhausted, but Frederick felt lighter than she had in months. The territorial marshal's office was a solid building near the center of the growing city, and Marshal James Carter listened with careful attention as Frederick laid out everything she knew. She told him about the forged land claims, the money that had disappeared, the homesteaders who had been run off their rightful property. She gave him the names she remembered from Richard's documents, including Samuel Drake and Robert Mitchell. "These are serious charges, madam," Carter said when she finished. "Do you have any physical evidence to support what you are saying?" "My husband took the documents with him when he left," Frederick admitted, "but the land office should have records of the claims that were filed. If you compare them to the testimonies of the homesteaders who were forced out, I think you will find discrepancies." Carter nodded slowly. "I will look into it. In the meantime, where can I reach you if I have more questions?" Frederick and Xander looked at each other. They had not discussed what came next, not really. "We are planning to head north," Xander said, "up toward Montana territory, but we can stay in Boise City for a few days if you need us." "That would be helpful," Carter said. "I will send a deputy to Lewiston to start making inquiries. Give me a week, and we will see what we can find." They rented a room at a modest boarding house, and for the first time since Richard had left, Frederick felt safe. She and Xander spent their days exploring Boise City, a settlement that was still rough around the edges but growing fast with the mining boom. They walked along the Boise River, talked about the future, made plans that felt both terrifying and exciting. On their third night in the city, as they sat in the small room they shared, Xander took Frederick's hand. "I want to marry you," he said. "Not because of propriety or because of what people might say. I want to marry you because I love you, because I want to spend every day of my life with you. But I know you just got out of one marriage, and I do not want to rush you into something you are not ready for." "I was never really married to Richard," Frederick said slowly. "Not in any way that mattered. He did not love me, and I did not love him. My father arranged the match because Richard seemed prosperous, seemed stable. I thought I could make it work, thought I could learn to be content. But with you, Xander, I am not just content. I am happy. I am myself. So yes, I will marry you whenever you want." They found a minister the next day, a kind, older man who asked no questions about their past and seemed genuinely pleased to unite them in marriage. Frederick wore her best dress, the blue calico with the white buttons, and Xander bought her a bouquet of wildflowers from a girl selling them on the street. They spoke their vows in the small church with the minister's wife as a witness, and when Xander kissed her as his wife, Frederick felt like her life was finally beginning. Marshal Carter sent for them a week later. "I have news," he said when they arrived at his office. "My deputy found several of the homesteaders who had been forced out, and their stories match what you told me. He also found a clerk at the land office who was willing to testify that he was pressured by Richard Palmer and Samuel Drake to backdate certain documents. It is enough to bring charges." "Will it stick?" Xander asked. "I believe so," Carter said. "Your husband has disappeared, Mrs. Palmer, but we will find him eventually. Men like that always leave a trail. In the meantime, Drake and Mitchell and 2 others have been arrested. They are claiming innocence, of course, but the evidence is mounting." Frederick felt a weight lift from her shoulders. "So people will know I was telling the truth." "They will," Carter confirmed. "And for what it is worth, I am sorry you were not believed sooner. You did a brave thing, coming forward." With the legal matter in capable hands, Frederick and Xander turned their attention to their future. They decided to head north to Montana Territory, to the Gallatin Valley, where Xander had heard there was good land available for homesteading. They wanted to build something of their own, something clean and honest and real. The journey north took them through some of the most beautiful country Frederick had ever seen. Mountains that touched the sky, rivers that ran clear and cold, forests of pine that seemed to go on forever. They traveled slowly, stopping to work odd jobs when they needed money, camping under the stars when the weather was fine, taking shelter in barns or cheap hotels when it was not. In the evenings, as they sat by their campfire, Xander would tell Frederick stories about his childhood, about learning to rope cattle from his father, about his mother's apple pie that she made every Sunday without fail. Frederick shared her own memories, the good ones from before her father had died and left her alone, vulnerable to a man like Richard Palmer. They were building a new story together, one paragraph at a time. They reached the Gallatin Valley in early September, as the aspens were beginning to turn gold on the mountainsides. The valley was wide and green, with good water and rich soil, and there were still parcels available for homesteading. They filed their claim on 160 acres near a clear stream, land that would require hard work but promised reward for those willing to put in the effort. Their first winter was hard. They built a small cabin, just one room with a loft, and chinked the gaps with mud and moss. Xander hunted for meat, while Frederick preserved what she could from the late garden they planted. They had little money and fewer possessions, but they had each other, and in the dark, cold nights when the wind howled outside their cabin, they would lie together under every blanket they owned and talk about the spring, about the garden they would plant, about the barn they would build, about the life they were creating. In March, as the snow was beginning to melt and the first hints of green appeared in the valley, Frederick realized she was pregnant. She told Xander one evening as they sat by the fire, and she watched his face transform with joy. "A baby," he said wonderingly, placing his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Frederick asked, suddenly nervous. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Xander said. He pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully as if she were made of glass. "You have given me everything, Frederick. A home, a purpose, love, and now a child. I am the luckiest man alive." Their son was born in November of 1877 as the first snow of winter dusted the mountains. He came into the world with a lusty cry, and Frederick held him in her arms and wept with relief and joy. They named him Samuel, after Xander's father, and he had his mother's green eyes and his father's dark hair. Xander proved to be a devoted father, walking the floor with Samuel when he cried at night, making toys for him from scraps of wood, singing him songs that his own father had sung to him. Frederick watched her husband with their son and fell even more deeply in love with him, seeing the gentleness in his rough rancher's hands, the tenderness in his voice. Word came the following spring that Richard Palmer had been found in San Francisco, living under an assumed name. He was arrested and brought back to face charges. Samuel Drake and Robert Mitchell had already been convicted and sentenced to prison terms. Richard's trial was swift, the evidence overwhelming. He was sentenced to 10 years in the territorial prison, and Frederick felt nothing but relief when Xander brought her the news. That chapter of her life was finally, truly closed. Over the next 3 years, their homestead prospered. They added rooms to the cabin, built a proper barn and a chicken coop. Xander ran cattle on their land, building a small but healthy herd. Frederick had her garden, her chickens, and in 1879, another baby, a daughter they named Clara after Frederick's mother. Clara was quieter than Samuel, thoughtful and observant, and she followed her father around the ranch from the moment she could walk. In 1881, a letter arrived from Marshal Carter. Richard Palmer had died in prison of fever, the letter said, and with his death, Frederick was officially a widow. Except she was not really, because she was Xander's wife in every way that mattered. But the news brought a sense of finality, of doors closing on the past. Their ranch continued to grow. Xander hired help during the busy seasons, young cowboys who were respectful and hardworking, who would sit at their dinner table and listen to Frederick tell stories. Some of them had heard rumors about the lady rancher who had stood up to corruption in Lewiston, who had been called crazy by a husband who turned out to be a criminal. Frederick's story had become something of a legend in Montana territory, a cautionary tale about believing rumors and a celebration of courage. In 1883, when Samuel was 6 and Clara was 4, Frederick gave birth to twin boys. They named them Jacob and Thomas, and the cabin that had once been so quiet now rang with the noise of children. Xander built an addition, creating proper bedrooms, and Frederick sewed curtains and quilts to make their home warm and welcoming. On a summer evening in 1885, as Frederick sat on the porch watching Xander teach Samuel how to rope fence posts while Clara chased the twins around the yard, she thought about how far she had come. 9 years ago, she had been alone in Lewiston, branded as crazy, abandoned by a husband who had tried to destroy her reputation to save his own skin. Now she was here, surrounded by children and love, married to a man who saw her for exactly who she was and loved her more for it. Xander caught her eye and smiled, that slow, warm smile that still made her heart skip. He said something to Samuel and walked over to the porch, sitting down beside her and taking her hand. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About how lucky I am," Frederick said. "About how different everything is from what I thought my life would be." "Better or worse?" Xander asked, though his tone suggested he knew the answer. "So much better," Frederick said. She leaned her head on his shoulder, watching their children play in the golden evening light. "Sometimes I think about what would have happened if you had listened to the townspeople, if you had not come to my house that day." "I was always going to come," Xander said. "I have learned that when everyone tells me to avoid something, it is usually worth investigating. But I never expected to find you, to find this, to find home." "I love you," Frederick said, the words as easy and natural as breathing after all these years. "I love you too," Xander replied. He kissed her temple, his arm around her shoulders. "Every day more than the day before." As the sun set over the Gallatin Valley, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple and pink, Frederick thought about the woman she had been in Lewiston, alone and afraid, and the woman she was now. She had been called crazy for knowing the truth, for refusing to accept lies as reality. But she had not been crazy. She had been strong, strong enough to survive, strong enough to accept help when it was offered, strong enough to love again and build a new life. The children's laughter filled the air as Clara caught one of the twins and Samuel successfully roped the fence post, whooping with triumph. Xander called out praise, pride evident in his voice. This was her life now, Frederick thought. This loud, chaotic, beautiful life full of love and work and purpose. This was what she had fought for, what Xander had helped her claim when he chose to see the truth instead of believing the lies. In 1887, they added another room to the house, a proper parlor with windows that looked out over the valley. Frederick hung curtains she had sewn herself, placed chairs that Xander had built from pine harvested on their own land. It was a room for gathering, for when neighbors came to visit, for when Xander's sister and her family made the journey from Denver. It was a testament to their prosperity, but more than that, it was a symbol of belonging, of having a place in the world that no one could take away. That fall, Samuel started at the small school that had been built in the valley, riding there on his pony with 3 other ranch children. Clara cried to be left behind, but Frederick promised her that her turn would come soon. The twins were 3 now, wild and energetic, and Frederick spent her days chasing after them, tending her garden, preserving food for the winter, sewing clothes, and managing the household accounts. She had become known in the valley as a woman of good sense and strong character. When disputes arose between neighbors, they sometimes came to Frederick and Xander to help mediate. When a young bride struggled with her first winter on an isolated homestead, it was Frederick who rode over with food and encouragement. She had found her place, not just in Xander's life, but in this community that valued truth and hard work. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1886, Xander took Frederick to Bozeman, the nearest town of any size. They left the children with a trusted neighbor and spent 3 days acting like the young couple they still were in many ways. They stayed in a real hotel, ate in a restaurant, bought supplies they needed, and a few luxuries they did not. Xander bought Frederick a cameo brooch, and she bought him a new leather belt with silver tooling. But the best part of the trip was simply being together, walking the streets hand in hand, talking without interruption, making love in a bed that was not surrounded by sleeping children. "We should do this every year," Xander said as they lay together in the hotel room, the sounds of the town filtering through the window. "Every year," Frederick agreed. She traced patterns on his chest, feeling peaceful and content. "Although I already miss the children." "So do I," Xander admitted. "But it is good to remember who we were before we were Mama and Papa." "I was a woman who everyone thought was crazy," Frederick said, but her tone was light. "You were a woman who everyone was wrong about," Xander corrected. "You were a woman who was brave and true and stronger than anyone gave you credit for. You still are." In 1889, when Samuel was 12, Clara was 10, and the twins were 6, Frederick and Xander took in a young orphan girl whose parents had died of influenza. Her name was Emma. She was 8 years old, and she had no other family. The children accepted her immediately as their sister, and Frederick found that her heart had room to expand even further. Emma was quiet at first, traumatized by her loss, but gradually she began to bloom under the love and stability of the Thompson household. Xander continued to build their herd, making shrewd purchases and trades, earning a reputation for fair dealing and quality stock. Neighboring ranchers sought his advice, and he became known as one of the most knowledgeable cattlemen in the valley. But he never let his work consume him the way some men did. He made time for his children, teaching them to ride and rope and care for animals. He made time for Frederick, still bringing her coffee before she asked, still holding her hand when they sat together in the evenings. One night in the spring of 1890, as they lay in bed together, Xander said quietly, "Do you ever regret it? Leaving Lewiston, giving up your house, starting over with nothing?" "Never," Frederick said without hesitation. "That house was never really mine. It was something Richard chose, a place he kept me. This ranch, this life, this is mine, ours. We built it together." "We did," Xander agreed. He pulled her closer, his hand resting on her hip. "And we are not done building yet." Frederick became pregnant again in the summer of 1890, a surprise but a welcome one. Their youngest child, a daughter they named Grace, was born in March of 1891, as the valley was waking up from winter. The older children doted on her, and Frederick marveled at the family she had created, at the love that filled their house. Samuel was 14 now, already as tall as his father, and Xander was teaching him the intricacies of ranch management. Clara had developed a talent for training horses, working with patience and gentleness to turn wild range horses into reliable mounts. The twins were in school, learning their letters and numbers, bringing home artwork that Frederick proudly displayed. Emma had become more confident, her smile coming more easily, her laughter ringing out as she played with the other children. The years continued to pass, marked by seasons and milestones. Samuel turned 16, then 18, and began to court the daughter of a neighboring rancher, a sensible girl named Margaret who was not intimidated by hard work. Clara declared that she would never marry, that she preferred horses to boys, though Frederick suspected that might change when the right young man came along. The twins developed distinct personalities, Jacob serious and studious, Thomas adventurous and bold. Emma showed a talent for cooking, helping Frederick in the kitchen and dreaming of opening a restaurant someday. Grace toddled around the ranch, adored by everyone, fearless in the way that youngest children often are. In 1895, 20 years after Richard Palmer had left Lewiston spreading lies about his wife's sanity, Frederick stood in her kitchen preparing dinner for her family. She was 43 years old, her auburn hair showing threads of silver, lines around her eyes from years of smiling and squinting at the Montana sun. Through the window, she could see Xander working with Samuel and Clara in the corral, the three of them moving in easy coordination. The twins were doing their chores. Emma was setting the table, and Grace was playing with a wooden doll Xander had carved for her. This was her life, Frederick thought. Not the life she had imagined when she was a young woman in Idaho, but so much better than anything she could have dreamed. She had been called crazy for refusing to be silent, for knowing the truth and standing by it. But the real madness would have been accepting the lies, letting men like Richard Palmer and Samuel Drake silence her with shame and intimidation. Xander came in as the sun was setting, smelling of horses and hay, and wrapped his arms around Frederick from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "What is for dinner?" he asked, but she knew he did not really care. This was his ritual, this moment of connection after a day of work. "Stew and biscuits," Frederick said, leaning back into his embrace. "Your favorite." "You are my favorite," Xander said, turning her in his arms to kiss her properly. After 20 years of marriage, his kisses still made her feel like a young bride. Everything else is just a bonus. The children groaned good-naturedly at their parents' display of affection, but Frederick saw Samuel smile at Margaret, saw the understanding in his eyes. He had grown up watching his parents love each other, had learned from their example what a marriage should be. All of her children had learned that, she thought with satisfaction. They had learned that love was not just words but actions, not just feelings but choices made every day. After dinner, as the family gathered in the parlor, Samuel cleared his throat nervously. "Margaret and I have something to tell you," he said, and the young woman beside him blushed. "We would like to get married in June if we have your blessing." Frederick looked at Xander, saw her own joy reflected in his face. "You have our blessing," Xander said warmly. "Both of you." "Welcome to the family, Margaret." The wedding was held on a perfect June day in 1895, with the whole valley invited to celebrate. Frederick watched her oldest son pledge his life to the woman he loved and remembered another wedding. The quiet ceremony in Boise City when she and Xander had stood before a minister and promised forever. Samuel and Margaret's wedding was larger, more festive, but the core of it was the same. Two people choosing each other, choosing to build a life together. As Frederick and Xander danced at their son's wedding, spinning slowly to the music of a fiddle and guitar, he said, "We did good, you and I." Look at what we built." Frederick looked around at their children, their friends, their neighbors, the ranch in the distance that represented years of hard work and love. "We did very good," she agreed. "Better than I ever hoped." "I knew better," Xander said, his dark eyes warm on hers. "The moment I met you, I knew you were something special. Everyone else thought you were crazy, but I saw the truth. I saw you." "You saved me," Frederick said softly. "No," Xander replied, pulling her closer as they danced. "You saved yourself. You stood up for the truth when everyone else called you a liar. You kept going when anyone else would have broken. I just had the good sense to recognize a remarkable woman when I met one, and the great fortune that she agreed to let me love her." 20 years after riding into Lewiston, Idaho, and finding a woman the town had written off as crazy, Xander Thompson held his wife close and thanked whatever forces had guided him to her gate that May morning. He had come looking for work and found everything he never knew he needed. She had been trying to survive and found a partner who saw her truth when everyone else believed the lies. They had built a life together, a family, a legacy that would continue through their children and their children's children. The ranch that bore their name would stand for generations, a testament to what could be built when two people chose to see truth over lies, love over convenience, courage over fear. As the sun set over the Gallatin Valley on that June evening in 1895, Frederick rested her head on Xander's shoulder and felt nothing but gratitude. The past was behind her, the pain of Lewiston, a distant memory. What mattered was this moment, this man, this family, this life they had created against all odds. She had been called crazy, but she had never been anything but sane, strong, and certain of who she was. And Xander had known that, from the very first moment, had seen past the lies to the woman beneath. That was the greatest gift anyone had ever given her, and she had spent 20 years giving it back to him. The gift of being seen, being known, being loved exactly as they were. Together, they had proven that truth would always outlast lies, that love built on honesty would always endure, and that sometimes the cowboy who did not listen to rumors was exactly the hero the story needed.